I've carried this truth like a stone in my chest for years, convincing myself silence was safer. But the lies have rotted everything around me. If I tell you what really happened, you'll never see me the same way again. My stepdad tossed my dad's watch in the trash like it was nothing. Then, just to twist the knife, he told the neighbors I'd been stealing from my own mom. I went to her, begged her, to see what he was doing to me. She didn't even blink. Just stared right through me and said, "Why can't you just be grateful?" I didn't say a word after that. That was 9 months ago. This morning I saw him standing on the other side of my new school's fence, staring straight at me while I sat there breathing through an oxygen mask. My friend Carter, man, he's one of those rare people who's just good to his core. The kind of guy who would eat the burnt pancakes so you could have the nice ones. Eagle Scout. By 14 he was staying after school events until 3 in the morning just to help janitors stack chairs. He even learned EMT training, not because it was fun for him, but because he thought one day someone might need it. Junior year his world imploded. His dad took his own life in the garage while Carter was at a homeless shelter handing out food. His father had left a note about Carter's mom and his best friend Bill. About how Carter wasn't actually his son. About how the affair had been going on for nearly 2 decades. But when Carter found his dad's body, the note was already gone, burned by his mom. At the funeral, she told everyone Carter's dad had just been secretly depressed. And the whole town bought it. Bill even gave a teary eulogy about losing his best friend. 3 months later, Bill moved into the house to help out. His mom told everyone, Carter needs a father figure. Soon after, they got married. Small, quick ceremony. Carter was the ring bearer. That's when the erasing began. One day Carter came home from school and all of his dad's things, little league trophies, camping photos, his cologne, were boxed up in the garage. Bill told him, "Your mom needs to move on." His mom, half glazed from the pills Bill's doctor friend prescribed, just nodded along. Carter found his dad's watch in the garbage. Bill caught him digging it out and shouted, "Stealing from your mother now?" Loud enough for the neighbors to hear. That's when the beatings began. Bill had been a cop 2 towns over. He knew exactly how to hurt someone without leaving proof. No marks on the face during the school year. Always open-handed so there'd be no knuckle bruises. Always when Carter's mom was passed out from her midday wine and Xanax routine. Sometimes Carter would cry loud enough to wake her, but she'd just roll over while Bill comforted him, telling her he was having nightmares. When the school held the first parent-teacher conference, Bill played the perfect concerned stepfather. He even showed Carter's teachers videos of him screaming and throwing things, without mentioning that those outbursts came after hours of Bill's hands around his throat, telling him his dad was a coward who'd rather die than raise a disappointment. Bill's therapist buddy diagnosed Carter with complicated grief disorder and oppositional defiance. The school filed it in his records. The meds they gave him made his hands shake, made his words slur. When he tried telling the school counselor about Bill, she wrote delusional episodes and projecting unresolved father issues in her notes. Then she called Bill to come pick him up early. That night, the beating was worse than any before. The college fund Carter's dad had been saving for him since birth? Bill controlled it now. Used it for his own kids from his first marriage, kids who came over on weekends and called Carter psycho, while Bill just smirked. When Carter's grandma asked about the college money at Thanksgiving, Bill handed her fake bank statements showing Carter had been stealing from it. "We didn't want to worry you," he said, patting Carter's sedated mom on the shoulder. Grandma stopped calling after that. The Thursday before Thanksgiving break, Carter finally snapped. Bill swung at him and Carter caught his wrist midair, shoving him backwards into the coffee table. Bill got a tiny cut on his forehead and immediately called 911. "My stepson attacked me. I think he's having a psychotic break. His dad committed suicide. Please hurry, I'm scared." The cops who used to work with Bill showed up. Handcuffed Carter on his own front lawn. Marked it down as a domestic incident. The following Monday, the school resource officer pulled Carter aside and said, "We're watching you now." But the hardest part for him wasn't Bill. It was his mom. Sometimes she'd wake up almost clear-headed, looking like she wanted to say something, but then Bill would hand her her pills, kiss her forehead, and she'd fade away again. The night Carter got down on his knees and begged her, really begged her, to see what was happening, she just stared at him with empty eyes and said, "Why can't you just be grateful?" That's when Bill added a new layer to the abuse, security checks. Random body searches, claiming he was making sure Carter wasn't hiding weapons or drugs. Sometimes he'd make Carter strip in the living room. "This is what happens to criminals in jail," he'd say. "You want to act like one, you get treated like one." His hands would linger in places they shouldn't. "Your dad never taught you how to be a man. Someone's got to." Carter stood there, 14 years old, completely naked in his own home. Bill's phone camera recording the whole thing, for documentation. The day before Thanksgiving, I went over to Carter's place. Bill opened the door with that politician smile of his, wide grin, firm handshake, the whole good neighbor act. "Carter's upstairs doing homework," he said, chuckling like a proud dad. "You know how we have to stay on him about grades now." When I walked into Carter's room, something immediately felt wrong. The walls were bare. No posters, no photos. The door didn't even have a lock anymore. His bed was just a mattress on the floor. "Where's all your stuff?" I asked. Carter didn't answer. He just stared off at nothing, this vacant, hollow look, the kind you see in photos of people who've already given up. Then his phone buzzed, Bill calling him down for dinner. Carter didn't move right away. Instead, he walked over to his closet, pushed some hanging clothes aside, and that's when I saw it. His dad's hunting rifle. Hidden in the corner. box of shells tucked under his old scout uniform. "I think you should go," Carter said quietly. I backed out of the room, legs suddenly feeling like they didn't belong to me. Downstairs, Bill was in the kitchen with Susan, talking casually about how he needed to search Carter's room later for stolen property. She nodded at everything, her eyes half-lidded from whatever cocktail of pills he'd given her. I mumbled something about homework and headed for the door. But just as I reached for the handle, Bill's hand clamped down on my shoulder, firm enough to hurt. "Everything okay up there?" he asked, his voice still sugary but with an edge that made my skin crawl. I nodded quickly, pulled away, and practically bolted to my car. Once I was inside, I just sat there, engine running, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. That rifle kept flashing in my mind, and Carter's empty stare, the same dead look I'd seen in old photos of his dad. I dialed 911. My thumb hovered over the call button. And then I remembered the last time the cops came, how they shook Bill's hand, called him brother. I hung up. Instead, I drove 30 minutes to the next county over, straight to the sheriff's office. No way was I going near Millbrook PD. Half those guys play poker with Bill every Friday night. At first, the desk sergeant looked like I was wasting his time. But when I said Bill's name, his expression sharpened. "Bill Lawson?" he asked, leaning forward. He called over Detective Rachel Torres, a woman with eyes so sharp you felt like she could see straight through you. She told me she'd been keeping tabs on Bill since some incident at his last precinct, the kind that gets buried real deep. I told her everything. She wrote it all down, asking detailed questions about dates, times, and exactly where I'd seen that rifle. 2 hours later, we pulled up to Carter's house. Every light was blazing. Bill's voice carried from inside, yelling about missing property and ungrateful kids. Through the window, I saw Carter on his knees in the living room. Bill was upstairs, slamming things around, ranting about respect. Torres called for backup, but only from state police outside the area. She wasn't about to risk any of Bill's buddies showing up. 15 minutes later, 3 state trooper cars rolled in. Bill came out grinning, shaking hands, until he saw Torres. His smile dropped instantly. She told him they were there for a welfare check. He tried to spin some story about Carter being troubled since his father's suicide, but Torres cut him off and said she needed to talk to Carter alone. With 3 troopers watching, Bill couldn't refuse. Carter sat in Torres's unmarked car, staring down at his folded hands, silent. I pulled out my phone and showed her the videos I'd been taking for months without even knowing why. Carter's bruises after disciplined talks, his hands trembling so badly he couldn't hold a pencil, his mom passed out at 2 in the afternoon. Torres's face darkened with each clip. "When did you take this one?" she asked, pointing to a video of Carter changing his shirt, purple marks striping his ribs. The state police found the rifle exactly where I'd said it would be. Bill instantly launched into his performance, claiming Carter must have stolen it, that he was planning something violent, just like his father. Susan shuffled into the living room, barely able to stand, parroting whatever Bill was saying. Torres took plenty of photos of her condition, the pill bottles, everything. It was close to 11 p.m. when Carter came home with me that night. My parents didn't even hesitate when Torres called. They said yes before she finished the sentence. He didn't touch the sandwich my mom made. Didn't answer when my dad gently asked if he needed anything. He just sat there wrapped in my mom's old quilt, staring at the floor. Thanksgiving morning, Torres called while we were setting the table. She'd been digging all night and found 2 excessive force complaints against Bill from his old department, both involving minors. Both conveniently dropped. She needed Carter to speak up. Without his testimony, she said, her hands were tied. And Bill was already working the phones, telling anyone who'd listen that I was poisoning Carter's mind. That night, during Thanksgiving dinner, right as my mom was passing the mashed potatoes, Carter broke. Not a few quiet tears, no. It was gut-wrenching, whole-body shaking sobs. My mom pulled him into her arms and he choked out what Bill had been doing. The body searches. Forcing him to strip. Recording it. How his mom just looked right through him, like he wasn't even there anymore. My dad stood up silently, stepped outside and called Torres. The timeline still blows my mind. Bill moved in just 3 months after Carter's dad died, and somehow in that short time he'd already set up his whole little empire, doctor friend, therapist buddy, the works. It was like he'd been planning it long before. Friday morning, Detective Torres arranged for Carter to be seen by Dr. Michael Foster at the county hospital. She picked that place on purpose, somewhere Bill had 0 connections. The exam took 3 hours. Dr. Foster found old rib fractures that had healed wrong, bruises and patterns that screamed of someone who knew exactly how to hit without leaving obvious damage, defensive wounds up and down his arms. Carter sat there in a hospital gown, looking so small I barely recognized him. As a mandated reporter, Foster immediately started filing the official paperwork. By that evening, Torres had Carter released into temporary protective custody, and my parents didn't even hesitate to take him in while the legal side got sorted. That same afternoon, around 4, I was upstairs helping Carter unpack when my mom called up that someone was at the door. I glanced out my window and froze. Bill's truck in our driveway, 2 Millbrook police cruisers right behind him. By the time I got downstairs, my dad was already on the porch. Bill was in full performance mode, demanding Carter come home immediately, waving around papers like they were gospel. The 2 cops with him looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. Then Bill pulled out his phone and played a recording, Carter screaming and crying after one of the beatings. But of course it was only Carter's reaction. No context. No proof of what came before. One of the officers stepped forward, saying Carter needed to leave with his legal guardian. My dad asked for a warrant. They didn't have one, claimed they didn't always need one for domestic issues. That's when Torres pulled up in her unmarked car, folder in hand. She walked right past Bill, didn't even acknowledge him, and showed the officers her emergency custody order, signed by a county judge just 2 hours earlier. Bill's face went red. He tried to argue jurisdiction, said these were his local officers and county had no say here. Torres just calmly pulled out her phone, made a call, and 10 minutes later, 2 state trooper cars rolled up. The troopers looked at both sets of paperwork while Carter watched from my bedroom window, gripping the sill so hard his knuckles turned white. 20 long minutes later, the state police sided with Torres. Bill had to leave. But as he passed my dad, he leaned in just enough for us to hear. This isn't over. By then, half the neighborhood had come outside to watch. 3 days later, Monday, Carter went back to school with a county social worker, Ms. Rodriguez, shadowing him. But the damage had already started. Word had spread over the weekend and Bill's version was making the rounds. Through the parent grapevine, Carter was now the disturbed kid who'd threatened his family with his dead father's gun. Teachers who used to smile at him wouldn't meet his eyes. Even Mr. Harrison, his old track coach, looked away. Ms. Huang, one of the few who still seemed to care, found him at lunch and pulled him into her office. She'd spent her weekend digging through his file, mapping the behavior reports. Every incident, started after his dad died, exactly when Bill moved in. She showed Carter the chart on her laptop, gave him her personal cell number on a sticky note, and told him her door was always open. Tuesday morning, Susan showed up at the school. She looked clearer than I'd seen her in months, but her hands were shaking as she signed the papers Bill had prepared. She told the principal Carter needed intensive psychiatric treatment for his violent delusions about Bill. From Ms. Huang's office window, Carter just sat there and watched her nod along to everything the principal said. Ms. Rodriguez tried to intervene, but Susan still had legal custody. By Wednesday after school, I'd had enough. I started pulling together everything I'd ever documented, with help from my girlfriend, Sarah. Her mom had treated Carter at urgent care 6 months earlier and had noticed bruises that didn't match his bike accident story. We went through every photo of his injuries I'd taken, every screenshot of his texts about Bill, built a full timeline from the day his dad died. We uploaded it all to 3 different cloud accounts and gave Ms. Huang the logins. Thursday morning, things escalated again. Dr. Brennan, Bill's therapist buddy, showed up with commitment papers, claiming Carter was a danger to himself and others. Ms. Huang immediately pushed back. Brennan hadn't seen Carter in over 2 months. The principal was useless, just wringing his hands, while Brennan insisted he had legal authority. Torres was tied up in court and couldn't be reached. Carter locked himself in the bathroom. Wouldn't come out. Ms. Huang called Dr. Foster from the hospital. He drove over personally, reviewed Brennan's papers in the principal's office and tore them apart, wrong dates, mismatched codes, the whole thing looking like it had been filled out ahead of time. The principal finally said they needed the district's lawyer to review it before acting. Friday night, Carter stayed with his Aunt Patricia, his dad's sister, who'd driven up from Delaware when she heard what was going on. She brought photo albums from before. Carter and his dad camping. Fishing. Just normal. Happy. Then she told us something that made my stomach drop. 2 weeks before he died, Carter's dad had called her asking strange questions about Bill. If she remembered him from high school. If she'd ever heard rumors. The room went silent. Saturday morning, Frank Mitchell pulled into Patricia's driveway in his old pickup. He'd driven all the way from Pittsburgh after getting rambling, slurred phone calls from Susan. The second he saw Carter, how thin he'd gotten, the dark circles under his eyes, Frank's jaw clenched in that same way Carter's dad's used to when he was furious. He sat down beside him and said, "My son called me 2 weeks before everything happened. Said he'd found something about Bill that didn't add up." Frank pulled a weathered folder from his jacket, bank statements showing Bill had been stealing from the police pension fund at his old department. That's why he really left. Not for a better opportunity like he told everyone. Frank's son had even tracked down Bill's old partner, who'd been keeping copies of everything for years, just waiting for someone to care. Sunday morning, my phone rang. It was Susan. Her voice was calmer than I'd heard in months. She asked me to meet her at the little diner on Route 22, said Bill was at his brother's watching football. When I got there, she was sitting in a back booth, one coffee cup in front of her. Hands steady. Eyes clear. I told her about the rifle. About what Carter had been planning. Her face went pale, then flushed red. She kept shaking her head, no, but then her voice dropped, almost like she was confessing to herself. She told me about waking up once at 3 a.m. to find Bill rifling through her first husband's papers in the basement. When she'd asked what he was doing, he'd handed her 2 pills and a glass of water, told her she was having another episode. The next morning, the papers were gone. And Bill swore she'd imagined the whole thing. Monday came fast, the emergency custody hearing. Bill walked into court flanked by 3 high-priced attorneys and 5 uniformed officers ready to vouch for him. Our side? Torres. Dr. Foster. Ms. Huang. And a public defender who looked like she was fresh out of law school. Bill went first, rolling footage on a big screen, clips of Carter screaming and throwing things. He called them episodes. Of course, the parts where Bill's hands were on Carter's throat minutes earlier were conveniently missing. The judge, the same one I'd seen in the paper golfing with the police chief, nodded along as Bill spun his story about a troubled boy he'd tried so hard to help. And then, Carter stood up. He pulled his shirt over his head. The bruises across his ribs. The healing cuts on his back. The finger-shaped marks on his throat. The whole room went dead silent. His voice didn't shake when he said Bill told him no one would believe him, that his dad was weak for killing himself, and that Carter would be next. Bill's lawyer tried to shout over him, but it was too late. Everyone had already seen. The judge called a recess. When we came back, he extended emergency custody to the state, but still ordered supervised visits and family therapy. Bill didn't flinch in court, but I saw his jaw tighten and his knuckles go white. On the courthouse steps, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. Leaned in close. His breath was all coffee and rage when he whispered, "You destroyed my family. Susan will never forgive you." I pulled my phone right there and took pictures of the red marks on my arm. 2 weeks later, Carter started with Dr. Amanda Smith, a trauma specialist in the next county. No Bill connections. At first, Carter drew pictures instead of talking. Then slowly, he began explaining how Bill stripped everything away, one piece at a time. Dr. Smith documented every word. Built a record no one could erase. By January, Bill had changed tactics completely. Now he was the model stepdad, showing up to every school event, Susan on his arm, her eyes glazed from whatever new pills he had her on. PTA meetings. Bake sales. Coaching JV basketball. People who didn't know the truth started whispering, "What kind of boy abandons such a loving family?" And then someone smashed my car window and stole my laptop. Every evidence file I had was on it. The security cameras at work? Malfunctioned. But Bill didn't know Sarah had backed up everything to the cloud the night before. We let him think he'd won. The stress wrecked Carter's grades, C's and D's where he used to get straight A's. Teachers grew impatient. Bill emailed the principal suggesting military school to fix Carter's discipline issues. The principal forwarded it to social services. Frank wasn't letting go though. He used his retirement savings to hire a PI, who found sealed records from Bill's first marriage, restraining order, allegations of abuse, lost custody after their daughter showed up to school with bruises. But sealed meant we couldn't use it in court. Week 8, Susan started individual therapy with Dr. Patricia Kim. Off Bill's radar. She told Kim about waking up in clothes she didn't remember putting on, losing days entirely, finding her keys in strange places. Kim started documenting it, classic signs of being drugged without consent. 3 days later, Carter's Aunt Lisa called me in tears. Someone had spray-painted home wrecker and kidnapper across her garage in dripping red paint. That night, she found her cat dead on the porch. A note stabbed through it read, "Stop interfering with families." Police took photos, but there were no prints. And Bill? He had 20 people ready to swear he'd been at work. The next morning, I got called to the principal's office. 2 detectives were waiting with a folder of photos, me hugging Carter, him at my house, me driving him places. Someone had sent an anonymous tip accusing me of having an inappropriate relationship with him. Their questions made my skin crawl. My mom showed up in 10 minutes flat with our lawyer on the phone. The investigation lasted 2 weeks, found nothing, but the whispers didn't stop. Ms. Huang started noticing how Carter would flinch when male teachers walked behind him. How he tensed if anyone touched him unexpectedly. When she asked about Bill's body searches, Carter broke. She filed a new CPS report, marked as potential sexual abuse. That triggered a whole different investigation. The pushback got worse. My parents were pulled over 3 times in 1 week for broken tail lights and expired tags that weren't. Lisa got 4 petty tickets in 5 days. Dr. Foster's car was keyed with "Mind Your Business" scratched into the hood. Then Susan missed a supervised visit, found passed out in her car at 2 p.m. The hospital said the meds in her system should have killed her. Bill told everyone she'd been stealing his prescriptions because she couldn't handle losing Carter. 2 weeks later, during a supervised visit, Susan waited until Bill went to the bathroom and slipped a folded paper into Carter's hand. "Check Dad's storage unit. 47B, she whispered. He knew. Her eyes glazed almost immediately afterward. Bill returned, saw the paper, and his whole face changed. That tip blew everything open. Inside that unit were boxes of Carter's dad's belongings Bill claimed he'd thrown away. Beneath them, a metal lockbox. Carter knew the combination. Inside, one envelope with Carter's name on it. His dad's handwriting. "If something happens to me, Bill Lawson did it." Dated 2 days before he died. We took photos, drove straight to county police. Torres met us in the lot. Forensics matched the handwriting perfectly. Torres opened a suspicious death investigation on the spot, but warned us Bill already had alibis lined up and falsified medical records to make it look like suicide. Meanwhile, Patricia Kim started cutting Susan's meds back. Her memory began returning. She told Patricia that Bill had arranged the entire funeral while she was barely conscious, insisted on cremation, even though her husband had always wanted to be buried next to his parents. That night, Carter sat in Frank's living room, reading his father's note over and over. His voice was quiet but steady. He didn't leave us. He was trying to protect us. And for the first time in months, I saw the guilt in Carter's face harden into something else. Resolve. Week 14, Frank's PI tracked down Bill's ex-wife Margaret, living 3 states away. She agreed to a video call. Her story was Susan's story, same slow medication creep, same isolation, same total control. She only escaped because her brother physically dragged her out while Bill was at work. At the next school board meeting, Bill arrived with a petition signed by 40 parents, calling Carter dangerous and unstable. But Ms. Huang stood up with 3 folders, Carter's grades before and after Bill. Dr. Foster presented medical evidence of abuse. The board couldn't decide and tabled it. Then Susan disappeared after therapy. 12 hours later, Patricia tracked her phone to Bill's doctor friend's house. She was passed out on the couch, 3 fresh prescription bottles in her purse, no memory of leaving therapy. Patricia filed an emergency report for medical abuse. Week 16, Margaret gave a sworn statement about everything Bill had done to her. Torres started building a behavioral pattern case, one that didn't need to prove murder, just a long history of abuse. Carter went back to school full-time, joined Ms. Huang's peer counseling group, even started helping younger kids spot abuse. His grades slowly climbed. Meanwhile, Frank's financial digging found that 2 days after Carter's dad died, Bill drained $30,000 from his business accounts. That was enough for Torres to get probable cause for a fraud investigation. And with that, she could finally get warrants. I was at the gas station on Maple Street, just minding my own business, when Bill's truck pulled in behind me. No other cars. No one else pumping gas. He walked over slow like he had all the time in the world and stopped way too close. His voice was low, almost conversational, but the words? Pure threat. Said I thought I was clever. Said accidents happen all the time. My parents took the same route to work every day. Carter's aunt lived alone in a house with no alarm system. I had my phone recording in my pocket the whole time while he talked about how tragic it would be if something happened to the people trying to destroy his family. His wedding ring kept clicking against my car as he tapped it. I didn't argue. I just backed away, got in my car, and drove straight to the county station. The detective on duty listened to that recording 3 times, jotting down notes about threats, intimidation, and witness tampering. 2 weeks later, Dr. Brennan got a letter from the medical board about a review of his license. Suddenly, his whole story about Carter changed. In a conference room at the courthouse, sweat soaking through his shirt, Brennan admitted that Bill had told him exactly what to write in Carter's file. With Brennan backing out, those diagnosis papers were useless in court. Week 18, Susan asked to meet Carter at the supervised visitation center downtown. She sat across from him, crying, holding his hands while the social worker watched. She said she was remembering things now, Bill telling her Carter was dangerous, needed medication, couldn't be trusted. Her hands shook as she described waking up confused with Bill standing over her bed, handing her water and more pills. Then the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit got involved. They'd found suspicious interstate transfers involving Bill's ex-wife's money. Quietly, without telling him, they pulled 5 years of his bank records. Soon after, Carter testified in a closed custody hearing in the Old Market Street courthouse. The judge this time wasn't one of Bill's golfing buddies, and he actually listened. Carter spoke about the searches, the beatings, the bruises. Bill's lawyer tried to make him sound unstable, but the medical reports didn't lie. Old fractures. Bruises in different stages of healing. 3 days later, Dr. Morrison, the one who kept Susan medicated, was arrested at his practice for illegal prescriptions. Federal agents walked him out in handcuffs. Facing 20 years, Morrison flipped instantly. He gave them everything: receipts, text messages from Bill asking for specific drugs to keep Susan sedated, offers of cash through his ex-wife's account. Week 20, the FBI hit Bill's house with a federal warrant. Carter, his aunt, and I watched from across the street. Agents hauled out computers, boxes of files. On one of the hard drives? Hundreds of videos, dated, labeled, showing Carter during those so-called body searches. They also found bank records proving Bill had been moving Susan's money into accounts for his kids from his first marriage. Bill kept yelling everything was legal as her husband, but the agents didn't stop. Meanwhile, Susan's new doctor at the county hospital began managing her meds properly for the first time in over a year. Her memories started coming back, Bill putting powder in her coffee, changing documents while she was out cold. She remembered the night her first husband died. Bill was at the house within 10 minutes, before anyone had even called him. Carter stayed with his aunt, but the nightmares were relentless. Woke up screaming, sure Bill was in the house. Checked closets, corners, under beds. Sat with his back to the wall so he could see every door. Week 22, the story hit the local news. Respected officer under federal investigation. Some of the parents who'd signed Bill's petition started calling to apologize. The grocery store clerk who'd given him Carter's schedule said she felt sick about it. The town split, half still defending Bill, half finally admitting they'd seen things but stayed quiet. Bill made bail using his pension and immediately filed for emergency custody of Susan, claiming she wasn't mentally competent. But Patricia, the nurse who'd been overdosing Susan, testified in court that Bill had given her explicit instructions to keep Susan sedated. Susan stood in court, clear-eyed for the first time in 2 years, and told the judge she wanted a divorce and a restraining order. Bill's lawyer argued she was too damaged to decide for herself. She answered every question the judge threw at her. Dates. Details. Everything. 3 nights later, I woke to sirens and saw the sky glowing orange over Lisa's neighborhood. The garage was half gone by the time I got there, flames licking toward the house where Carter and Lisa slept. Firefighters drenched everything while Carter stood barefoot in pajamas, shaking. Lisa's security camera caught a figure in dark clothes pouring something by the garage doors at 2 a.m. The face was covered, but the build? The walk? Exactly like Bill. His lawyer produced bar receipts and 2 off-duty cops swearing Bill was at a hotel until 3 a.m. Later, one of the FBI agents pulled me aside. Said they'd found brochures in Bill's desk for Whispering Pines Mental Health Facility, a private long-term care center 3 states away. He'd highlighted sections on power of attorney and permanent commitment, dated 6 months before Carter's dad died. Carter started speaking at Ms. Huang's peer advocacy group, telling other kids what had been done to him. 3 students came forward that week, saying they were living similar nightmares. One girl cried when Carter described the gaslighting, said she thought she was losing her mind until she heard him. Ms. Huang called him brave. Carter just said he was done being quiet. Week 24, Susan left rehab and moved in with her sister 2 hours from Millbrook. She'd gained weight, her hands steady, eyes sharp again. She wrote Carter every day, pages of apologies and explanations. He didn't open them. The fire investigator's report came back. The pour pattern ignition point, exactly like the arson training from Bill's police days. Not enough for charges, but Torres told Lisa and Carter to relocate again. 2 weeks later, Bill showed up at Carter's new school during lunch. He'd been there since 7 a.m., just standing by the fence. The second Carter spotted him through the cafeteria window, his body locked up. Couldn't breathe. Hyperventilated so badly the nurse had to give him oxygen. Bill told security he just wanted to talk about family matters. Claimed the restraining order only applied to the old school. The judge didn't buy it. Added new charges. Bill showing up at 7 a.m. like some creepy morning jogger who forgot to jog. That's dedication to being the worst. Margaret flew in from Arizona to take the stand herself. She brought 3 entire boxes, of medical records from when she was married to Bill. Inside? The same exact pattern we'd seen with Susan. The Xanax prescriptions creeping up in dosage month after month. The Ambien added on top. The psychiatrist friend diagnosing her with disorders she didn't have. Bank statements showing money vanishing into accounts she didn't recognize, and Bill's name on all of them. Property transfers she didn't even remember signing. The prosecutor didn't just see evidence, he saw a roadmap. He started calling it a pattern of predatory behavior. And Bill? He'd run this play before. More than once. Week 26, Frank took Carter to the cemetery. First time since it all began. Carter stood at his dad's headstone for 20 solid minutes, saying nothing. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his Eagle Scout badge and set it gently on the granite. Frank heard him whisper something, about protecting his mom now, about finally understanding why his dad had fought as hard as he did. They stayed until the sun started dropping, Frank's hand resting on Carter's shoulder. When news of Margaret's testimony hit, Bill's cop friend stopped answering his calls. The department suspended him without pay, then fired him outright when the FBI dumped their findings on the table. His pension? Gone. Benefits? Gone. 20 years of service erased in an instant. People started spotting him at Murphy's bar every night, whiskey glass in hand, muttering to himself about ungrateful kids and backstabbing friends. The bartender said he kept repeating that everyone will be sorry, and they don't know who they're messing with. Then the FBI found another woman. Not Margaret. Not Susan. Someone from 20 years ago, back when Bill was a rookie cop in Ohio. Her name was Jennifer Hayes. She died from an overdose, the exact same drug combo that killed Carter's dad. They found her in the garage with the car running. Officially? Suicide. Case closed in a week. The detective who signed off? Bill's academy roommate. Bill had been her boyfriend. And days after her death, he got a $200,000 life insurance payout. The FBI tracked down Jennifer's sister in Oregon. She'd been sitting on a box of Jennifer's letters for 20 years. She handed them over without hesitation. Said she'd known all along Bill had killed her sister, but no one would listen to a teenager back then. The letters? Same exact playbook Carter went through. The meds. The isolation. The manipulation so intense it made you doubt your own memory. 3 women. 20 years. 1 script. A toxicology expert the FBI hired went through Carter's dad's autopsy files. Found something the original coroner missed. The drug levels in his system didn't make sense for a solo overdose, sedative strong enough to knock him out before he could have taken the rest himself. Not a murder charge on its own, but enough to force the county to reopen the case. Meanwhile, Susan, 3 weeks clean, called me one night sobbing. She remembered more now. The night Carter's dad died, Bill handed her double her usual sleeping pills. Told her she looked stressed, needed rest. She woke at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom and found Bill gone. Heard him come in through the back door at 4, claiming he'd been watching TV downstairs. She'd been too drugged to process it then. Now? It made her sick. Lisa moved to a different district so Carter could start over. Nobody there knew about Bill. Or the trial. Or the hell Carter had been through. To them, he was just the quiet new kid who was good at math and pretty decent at basketball. For the first time in years, he was just Carter. The federal prosecutor offered Bill 15 years if he pled guilty to the fraud and abuse charges. Avoid a trial. Avoid the spectacle. Bill fired his lawyer on the spot. Said he'd represent himself because his connections would get him out like always. The prosecutor just shook his head. That night, Carter's phone rang. Bill's number. First, just breathing. Then Bill's voice, "This isn't over." The FBI traced it to a gas station 3 blocks from Lisa's new place. They ramped up protection. But everyone knew Bill still had friends who'd feed him information. Under pressure, Dr. Morrison cracked. Admitted Bill had asked him about untraceable drug combos 6 months before Carter's dad died. Claimed it was for a case. Morrison even gave him a list. Never imagined Bill would actually use it. Carter told Dr. Brown he wanted to testify. Didn't care how hard it would be. Someone had to say out loud that Bill killed his dad. They spent hours practicing, keeping his voice steady, making sure the facts landed. Susan's divorce finalized without Bill contesting it. She got the house, whatever money he hadn't stolen, and started NA meetings every morning. Called Carter every night to apologize. Then Lisa found a black rose on her windshield. A note stabbed through it, "Widows understand loss." Security footage caught Bill's car in the garage, even though his mother swore he'd been with her all evening. Her neighbor had seen him leave 2 hours earlier. The investigation was building momentum. But Bill? Still walking free. Still dangerous. Still convinced he'd win. 3 weeks later, trial began. Federal court downtown. Bill, representing himself, rejected jurors who looked like parents, anyone too educated, anyone who frowned at him. Thought he was stacking the deck. Didn't notice the prosecutor quietly building a jury who understood patterns of abuse. Opening statements, Bill first. pacing in front of the jury, spinning tales about troubled boys and tragic families. About how he'd saved Carter from his father's mental illness. 40 minutes of sacrifice and ungrateful children. Then the prosecutor stood, walked to the center of the courtroom, and began listing names. Jennifer Hayes, Margaret Foster, Susan Mitchell. 3 destroyed lives. 20 years of abuse disguised as love. 3 suspicious deaths. She had evidence boxes wheeled in, one for every year since 2004. Bill's face drained of color when he saw them. That night I stayed with Carter at the safe house. He couldn't sleep. Kept checking locks, pacing. Around 3 a.m. he pulled out his phone and showed me videos I'd never seen, him and his dad fishing, camping, laughing. His dad reading him stories before bed. Ordinary moments that had turned priceless. Next morning Susan testified first. 3 months of real therapy had sharpened her. She told the jury about the medication fog, about remembering in pieces, about Bill always being there with pills when she got too close to the truth. About how he drove her friends away, controlled every cent. When she described Bill comforting her at her husband's funeral while probably being the man who killed him, 3 jurors wiped their eyes. Bill objected 6 times. The judge overruled 6 times. Then Carter took the stand. Sat tall. Looked straight at Bill. He described the beatings that started 3 months after the wedding. The safety checks that were anything but. Where Bill touched him. What Bill said about his father. Bill tried to cross-examine, standing too close, raising his voice, but Carter didn't break. When Bill asked why anyone should believe a troubled kid with a family history of mental illness, Carter just held his stare. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Bill's hands started to shake. He brought up the rifle in the closet, trying to make Carter sound dangerous. Carter explained calmly, he'd thought about using it on himself, because Bill had made him believe that's what he deserved. 2 jurors had to leave the room. Then Bill made the mistake of going after Carter's father. Called him weak. Said he deserved what happened. Carter stood up in the witness box. The judge told him to sit. He didn't. He just kept looking down at Bill. And Bill snapped. Screaming about weak men and ungrateful sons. About how Carter's father was pathetic. About how he deserved it. Bailiffs had to drag him out of the courtroom. The jury had seen it now, the real Bill Lawson. No act. No mask. The next morning, Margaret appeared by video from Seattle. Too terrified to be in the same room as Bill, even with armed guards, she told the jury everything. The pills. The isolation. The bruises in places clothes could hide. The bank accounts she never opened. The property transfers she didn't remember signing. And her ex-husband's death that had always felt wrong. Right after, Jennifer's sister took the stand. She told the jury about the journals Jennifer had hidden before she died, pages documenting the same cycle of fear and control, her plans to leave, plans that never happened. Then came the shocker, Bill's own mother. She broke down on the stand, saying she hadn't been with him the night of the Black Rose. He told her to lie. Threatened to put her in a home if she didn't. Admitted he'd been taking her social security checks for years. She looked right at him and said, "I'm sorry for what I created." Closing arguments took 2 full days. The prosecutor wove every piece together, 20 years of calculated abuse, 3 families destroyed, 3 suspicious deaths. She laid out the bruises, the bank records, the prescriptions, the timeline. Showed how Carter's courage had broken a cycle that would have gone on forever. Bill's turn? A rambling mess about conspiracies. Ungrateful women. Lying children. He pointed at Carter and said he'd tried to save him from turning into his father. The jury was out for 3 days. When they came back, the foreman read the verdict. Guilty. On all federal charges. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Domestic abuse across state lines. Violence Against Women Act violations. Using interstate commerce to commit abuse. 25 years to life. State murder charges still pending. Bill screamed as they dragged him out. Said Carter had ruined everything. Said his father deserved to die. Swore he'd finish what he started. The heavy courtroom doors closed on his voice. 6 weeks later, the call came. The state had reviewed every scrap of evidence, the control patterns, the forged prescriptions, the inconsistencies in the autopsy, and decided they had enough for first-degree murder. They believed Bill had overdosed Carter's father on purpose, staging it to look like suicide. Susan agreed to testify again, hands shaking as she signed the paperwork. Carter wouldn't have to see Bill. Victims' rights laws kept him out of the courtroom this time. 3 months later, Carter and Susan sat together in a family therapist's office. She was 6 months clean, living with her sister, working part-time at a daycare. They started small. Favorite foods. Old TV shows. Then slowly, the heavier things. Carter's grades climbed. Colleges started calling. He picked a small state school 3 hours away, close enough for Frank to visit, far enough to start fresh. The murder trial took 8 months. The evidence was circumstantial but devastating when laid end to end. Bill's first wife testified, describing the same patterns, right down to the way he'd fixate on Carter's father, wanting everything he had. The jury took 4 hours to come back guilty. Life without parole. His appeals were denied in weeks. His mother sold her house to pay his legal fees and moved into assisted living. 9 months after the verdict, Carter spoke at an abuse prevention conference. Stood at the podium, note cards untouched, and told 300 people about how Bill had made everyone doubt their own reality. How the signs had been there, hidden behind a badge and a smile. A year later, Susan moved back into their house. Painted over every wall. Replaced every piece of furniture. Turned Bill's office into a craft room. Some days were still hard. She still flinched at sudden noises. but she was present in a way Carter hadn't seen in years. Frank created a scholarship in his son's name for kids overcoming family trauma and made Carter the first recipient. At the ceremony, Carter talked about his real dad, the one who coached Little League, volunteered at shelters, taught him to fish, to change oil, to show up for people you love. Carter majored in social work. Wanted to help kids spot the signs he'd missed. Some nights he'd call me at 2 a.m., shaken from nightmares about that rifle. His therapist gave him breathing exercises that helped, most nights. 18 months after the verdict, Susan adopted a German Shepherd from a rescue. Named her Hope. Carter helped train her to bark at strangers and sleep beside Susan's bed, the protection they never had before. 2 years after learning the truth, Carter stood at his father's grave again. This time, Susan stood beside him. They planted yellow roses, his dad's favorite. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Susan said, "We survived. Your dad would be proud of you." Carter nodded. For the first time, he could see a future that wasn't just about getting through the day. They walked back to their cars. Not fully whole, but no longer broken. And ready to keep building the life Bill had tried so hard to steal. If you enjoyed today's drama, just imagine what's waiting in the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go find the next train wreck together. Thanks for watching.